In today's video, we are going to discuss the second round recap of the Candidates 2022. It's the 8 players tournament and the winner is going to be selected to fight against Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, for the world championship title. So definitely the tournament is very interesting. So we are going to look at the second round recaps all game. So let's start out with the game between Richard Rapport versus Alireza Firouzja. In the first round, Hikaru Nakamura lost against Caruana Fabiano and Nepomniachtchi beated Liren. So Caruana, Fabiano and Nepomniachtchi is both are in the lead. And guess what? Today is the game between Ian versus Caruana. So let's check it out what is going to happen in that game. So first let's check it out what happened in the game between Richard Rapport and Alireza Firouzja. So let's check it out. So Richard with the white pieces starts out the game with 1 e4 and Alireza replied with c5, the Sicilian. Knight f3, d6, d4 takes, queen into d4. We have knight c6 by black, bishop to b5, pinning up the knight so that now the knight cannot capture the queen on d4. a6, bishop into c6. You can't go back to a4 because now black can play b5 hitting the bishop, and on the next move black can capture the queen. So now it's losing for white. So that is why bishop into c6, bc6, and now we have c4 by white. So after playing c4, you can understand a very important point. Whenever in the Sicilian, black always try to open up the position with d5 in the future. So once you played c4, now black is already very uncomfortable because now opening up with the position with d5 is already very hard because the c and the e pawn is covering the d5 square. e5, queen to d3, knight to e7, c5. A very nice move by white. You can't capture the pawn really because here I can simply trade the queens and I can capture the pawn on e5. And you can check it out, all the isolated pawns. The f7 pawn is weak. The king have lost his castling rights. So already white is already very comfortable and better in the position. So knight to g6 by black, pawn takes, queen takes. We have a queen trade and we have bishop to e3 by white. And I would already suggest that white is slightly better. Although it's an equal position, but practically I think white is better because of the weak pawns on the a and the c6. But in the exchange, black is having the bishop pair, which is a good thing. We have a5 by black, so black wants to activate the bishop by playing bishop a6. White castle, f6, rook to c1 putting pressure, rook to a6 protecting the pawn, knight to d2, bishop to e6 taking all the squares from the knight, and here we have knight to e1. So now white is planning to maneuver the knight from the f3, and definitely white wants to play f3 and make his pawn structure much better. King f7, knight to d3, perhaps looking for the c5 square, rook to d8, king f1, bringing the king in the center because in the end game the activity of the pieces are the must, so you should always try to bring the king near the center in the end game. We have bishop to b4 hitting this knight, and also rook is hitting this knight, so white plays king to e2 protecting both the knights. Knight to h4. So idea of knight h4 is now black is provoking white to play g3 so that the white squares would already become very weak. So first white decides to capture the bishop on b4. A b4, and now he played g3. Knight to g6 going back. Bishop to c5. And after bishop c5, white is already putting pressure on the pawn on b4. But okay, it's an opposite color bishop, so I think perhaps drawing chances have been increased. But definitely white is having the edge because of the c and the b pawn being weak. Rook to b8 by Firouzja, a3. So white is trying to open up the position because if you don't play a3, there is no way you can open up your rooks. So the only way to open up the rooks to get some activity is to play a3 and open up the position. b3, rook a3, rook a8, knight to c4, knight bishop into c4, rook into c4, and here we have knight to f8 by black. So black wants to put the knight to e6, hit this bishop, out for the squares like d4. We have rook to b3 by white, not trading the rooks. I think perhaps trading the rook would have been slightly much more accurate and playing king to d3 in this position. Because after knight e6 hitting the bishop, white can play bishop e3. And guess what? The dark square white bishop is covering all the squares from the knight. And here, I think white can continue the game by playing rook b4, king c4, rook b7 check, rook e7 or something, like putting pressure on the 7th rank, and perhaps trying to push the b pawn, as the f2 pawn is protected by the bishop. So I don't think there is any weakness from the white side. So I think white can go for pushing up the pawn on b4. But okay, rook to b3 was played, and actually the same scenario happened, but keeping the rooks on the board. Rook d8, f4, trying to open up the position. You have to. There are many players who never go for playing f4 like aggressive. They try to keep themselves very calm and play very passive. I won't say passive, but just playing in their own area. But always go for attack. Knight d4 check, take, pawn takes. King d2, rook a1. Already we can say that white is better, because after rook c6, white is having 5 pawns, black is having 4 pawns. Rook h1, rook to c7 takes, king to d3, g6, e5. And I think at the place of e5, giving a check would have been the best, because after rook h8, white can play b4. White can play b4, and now white wants to push his pawn. So something like rook h3 going for the pawn on g3. I have king c4, pawn pushed. I have rook to d7. Trading the rook, capturing the pawn, b5, rook to e3, pushing the pawns, and guess what? White is on time to play rook c7, and black can't stop rook c8, and it's winning for white. This is the whole scenario. And after king c4, if you won't push this pawn and you try to capture this pawn, I can capture this pawn, and after this, I can still trade the rooks, and I can still go for pushing up the pawns, capturing this pawn, and white is actually very better, and actually white is winning the game. So I think after g6, giving a check would have been the best. But push, we have the pawn trade, rook h3, king e4, check, and here Richard started to repeat the position, and then he captured the pawn on g6. And here a couple of moves were played. Richard tried his best to take the advantage, as he's the one pawn up, but actually Alireza defended very well, and this is theoretically draw. Both the players played a couple of moves, but after king e6, on the move number 60, both the players decides to agree to a draw, because one thing is happening. Yeah, the black king is much faster than the white king. The black rook have cut off the white king, and the white rook have cut off the black king, so nothing is happening. It's a dead draw. If you even try to trade the rook, I can simply take a draw like this, and black has got the opposition. I'll just show you still the full line, and it's draw. So yeah, this was the game between Richard Rapport versus Alireza Firouzja of the round number 2. Now let's discuss the game of Hikaru Nakamura versus Teimour Radjabov. Okay, so Hikaru Nakamura is playing with the white pieces, and Teimour Radjabov is playing with the black pieces. So let's check it out what happened in the game. So Nakamura with the white pieces starts out the game with 1 e4. And every chess fan is looking out for the game between Hikaru Nakamura, because he's a very famous person in digital platform, I would say. He's having a large popularity on Twitch, on YouTube, on Insta, I would say, and on every digital platform, which is actually very cool for the chess world. So let's check it out. 1 e4 by Nakamura, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, we have the royal pace, knight f6, d3, preventing the pawn on e4, bishop c5, knight to d2, knight to d4 by Teimour Radjabov, not going for something like castle or playing d6, a very standard stuff, but playing knight to d4. Hitting the bishop, knight d4, bishop d4, c3 hitting the bishop, bishop to b6, and now we have d4 by white. Already it looks like, is white sacking a pawn? Pawn takes, bishop takes, and black is the pawn up. But what happened in the game is c6. The reason black didn't capture the pawn is white can go for playing e5, hitting the knight, knight to d5, knight to e4. And actually not even knight to e4, even castle is a fine move, and the game is actually very complicated. I'll show you why. After knight e4, you can't capture because the knight is hanging. If you capture, I can capture. And all who are thinking what will happen after c6, I can play knight to d6, and it's a mate. Yeah, that is the reason you can't capture. And for example, if you castle, I castle, and now if you try to play c6, hitting the bishop and also protecting the knight, I can play bishop d3. And if you try to capture this pawn now, I can play bishop g5, hitting the queen. And guess what? The best move is to capture the pawn. And it says you must enter in this position where you are having queen against bishop and the rook, and your all pieces are bad and white is better. So going for the pawn is actually very bad. And just let me show you one more thing. After castle take, after take, bishop g5. If you try to play something like queen c7, removing the knight, removing the queen from the bishop, knight f6 check. Takes, queen h5, and it's a fourth mate. You can't stop it, and it's over. And if you capture with the knight, I'm having bishop takes, and it's already over. Can't do anything. I'm having this queen g4 ideas, queen h5 ideas. It's over. If you try to play queen g6, queen c1, and you can't stop this, and it's mate. It's over. 1-0, and it's over. That is the reason the line is so much complicated. So Teimour Radjabov didn't want to enter in this line, and he played something like c6. Hitting the bishop, and white captured the pawn. Pawn takes, queen takes. And I would already say white is having an edge because it's a double pawn. White pawn structure is much better than black, but in the exchange, black is having the bishop pair, which makes the game equal. Castle, queen h5, hitting this pawn. Queen to c6, protecting the pawn. Rook e1, rook e8, knight f3, and here we have d5. Not going for capturing this pawn because after bishop d2, white is actually having a big lead in development. And if you try to play something like d5, I am having this knight g5, hitting the rook, hitting this pawn, it's over. That is the reason black didn't went for capturing the pawn. We have d5 opening up the position, and actually white sacrificed a pawn for opening up the bishop diagonal. h3, which is actually a fine idea, an equal position. Bishop d7, queen f3, rook to e8, bishop to e3, trading the bishop, and it looks like e3 and the d5 pawn are weak because they are already only protected by the queen. We have rook e5 by Teimour Radjabov, which was not a good move. He should have played something like h6 and just being safe from the future backrank mate. But playing rook e5 gives white an opportunity to play rook d1. And guess what? If you try to play something like capturing this pawn, being a greedy vidhi, you can play, then white can already play something like knight to d3. Hitting the rook, and after rook takes pawn, I'm having e4, hitting the rook d6, I'm having knight to c5. And it's actually very complicated, and in the end, white is already better because white is hitting the bishop, hitting the rook. You are already forced to capture the rook, and after a trade, like queen into b2, it says after queen into d7, you must play this position where white is better. And that was the reason it was so complicated, but actually rook d1 was the best. It is very deep line, but in the end, it is white is the one who is the best, who is better, and who can take advantage of playing rook e5. But in the end, Nakamura played e6, d6, which because rook d1 is actually very hard to calculate because in many variations, queen into a2 is coming. But in the end, rook d1 was much better. Queen d5. We have rook d1, we have a queen trade, rook into pawn, rook d5, f6, rook to c5, just a very nice rook maneuvering, rook e6, rook comes, takes, a6, and it looks like the position is already equal. Yeah? White is having 3 pawns on the queen side, black is having 3 pawns on the queen side against 2 pawns on the queen and the king side. And the bishop versus knight. Knight d4, but yeah, definitely white is better because of the knight on d4. It's the strongest piece, and I would say the invincible piece. h5, h4, g5, g3. King f7, couple of moves were played. And actually, I would say that like the players are given 2 hours on the clock each, and they get no increment. And after first 40 moves, they get an additional time of perhaps 1 hour. I would say, and if 1 hour 30 minutes, I don't remember. And after after 55 moves, they get an increment of they get an additional time of 10 minutes plus 15-second increment. So this is the time format of the tournament, which makes the game very interesting. And it's already move number 35, and both the players are extremely low on time. So we are going to see blunder by both the players. Rook c7, rook d5, rook c6, hitting the pawn and the bishop. Rook check, king moves, bishop to d7, rook captures the pawn. Pawn takes, rook to d4, rook to e4. Actually, at the place of playing rook e4, king f7 was much better, so that in the future, whenever a rook tries to attack the bishop, we can bring the king, centralize the king, activate the king, and also protect the bishop. Because the bishop on d7 is already very nice, protecting the pawn on b5. But as both the players were in time pressure, Radjabov played rook, hitting this pawn. And now we have rook to d6. And you see, white is trying to hit the bishop. And now comes rook d5, hitting this pawn. Bishop to c8. And here, actually, at the place of rook to d5, a much better move would have been to the b4, which gives a clear advantage to white. And after something like a4, our idea is to play something like this and attack this b5 pawn. So like some simple rook e5 defending the pawn. Rook to b5, you defend the pawn 2 times. I play rook to d7. b7 hitting the bishop, you go back, I play a3. A slow move. You have to play rook d4, you have to keep the rook like here to protect this pawn. King move, I play something like this, and after rook c5, I make you I'll force you to trade the rooks, and after trading the rooks, it's already winning. Yeah, I can simply bring the king and push the pawn, and it's winning. And if you don't trade the queens, don't trade the rooks, I can capture the pawn, and I'm already having 3 pawns on the queen side, which is too much for black to hold, and it's already winning for white. But yeah, definitely very complicated. Both the players are extremely low on time. But okay, it's 41 move number, so both the players are having time now. Rook to g5. Bishop to c8, rook to c5, bishop d7. Couple of moves were played. I would say maneuvering of the pieces. And slowly now Nakamura starts to make progress. And he captures the pawn on b5. And we have this position, where black is having 2 pawns on the king side, white is having 3 pawns on the queen side connected. So definitely from the first glance of view, it does look like white is winning. But converting this position is extremely hard in the lower and in the high level as well. So after knight into d4, we have check, king move, rook comes, and pushing the pawn. Check, bishop to f7. At the place of playing bishop f7, I think playing a rook to c3 would have been much interesting, because now neither pawn can move, because if you try to move this pawn, I can capture this. And if you try to play something like this, I'm having bishop f7 hitting the rook and the pawn. The best is to play a4, and now black can go for sacrificing the bishop, capturing the 2 pawns. And after a5, rook a4, I think this could be the best opportunity for black to play this position, because white can't checkmate with the knight and the rook against the rook. You have to keep this pawn if you want to win. But it's already very difficult for white to convert the position, because black is having 2 pawns on the queen side, on the king side. So perhaps it's going to be a draw, perhaps it's going to be win. The game would have been interesting. But we have bishop f7, which white played rook to d8. And we have a couple of moves. Check. a5. Now white is actually trying to push, and it's already very difficult for black to stop the pawn. King moves, king f7, rook comes, h6. The only chance for us, if you try to move the bishop, I can play rook g8 check, king f4, king f4, rook g1, trade the rooks, and it's winning. Best was to push the pawn, and after taking this, Nakamura actually calculated very well. Knight covers the square. Check, take, push, push, check. And now after 97, on the move number 75, Teimour Radjabov, after the long game of 7 hours, Teimour Radjabov decides to resign the game. Definitely very disappointing for Teimour Radjabov. The reason that he resigned because after knight e2, knight c1, knight c8 is coming, protecting the pawn, and after rook b8, a8, queen, it's already over. So a very good result for Hikaru Nakamura. Strong comeback. So now let's check it out what happened in the game between Ian Nepomniachtchi versus Caruana Fabiano. Okay, so we have the game between Ian Nepomniachtchi versus Caruana Fabiano. And Ian is playing with the white pieces and Fabiano is playing with the black pieces. Both are leading the tournament with a half-point lead. Ian starts with 1e4. e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, going for the Italian knight f6. So Caruana is challenging Nepo to go for playing this, where he knows what happens, like this, check, and the answer belongs here. But yeah, d3, bishop c5, short castle g6, c3. Perhaps white plays d4, perhaps white plays d4, perhaps white simply waits or plays something else. We have a6, we have a4, bishop a7. So definitely black Caruana is already preparing for an attack, or we can say already playing very safe, like playing bishop a7 already, so that he can use this dangerous diagonal in the future. Rook e1, h6, knight d2, g5. So already Caruana is going all in for the attack, as he has heaven castle on the king side, so he can go for attacking on the king side. b4, so Ian is going for attacking on the queen side. Knight to g4 and hitting the pawn on f2. Rook e2, the only move to defend the pawn on f2. Queen f6. So Caruana have brought his pieces in near the king side to attack at the place of pushing up the pawn. Queen e1 defending the pawn. If we try to play something like h3, we have bishop into f2, rook f2, knight f2, king f2, and h5, g4 could be very deadly. Although black gave up the 2 minor piece for the rook, but it's we can say a very good sacrifice, very good exchange sacrifice. So we have queen to e1 in the game by Nepo. Queen g7 making the square for the knight. Knight f1, castle, knight to g3. So Nepo is bringing both the knights on the king side. Knight e7, d4. In this, actually, I would say over here till here, Nepo wasn't in his preparation, but Caruana was in his preparation. He's just playing very fast chess, and definitely Nepo wants to get out of Caruana's preparation, so he decided to play d4. Pawn takes, knight c6, putting the pressure on the pawn on b4 and d4, rook a3, and he decides to give a pawn sacrifice. Knight d4, bishop d4, h3 hitting the knight. Knight to e5, bishop a2, c5 takes, rook to b3, b5, knight to f5. You can't take because of the takes, the a file is open, and if you try to capture this, bishop a6, and you lose an exchange. So knight f5, queen f6. Perhaps I think capturing this, and after taking this, and if I try to play rook g3, queen f6, and black is better actually. Even if white tries to play h4, we can play g4 or g4. The pawn is protected by the knight, h5 is coming, and black is very stable. And you can't even push your f pawn because the f pawn is pinned. But queen f6, king h2, pawn takes rook g3, king h7. I think he should have captured this, and after taking this, king h7, and it's the fine position. And all those were thinking what will happen if black goes for capturing the f5 pawn. Now f4 is coming because now there is no pin. f4, and it's white who is now winning the game. Who is better at least, because hitting the knight, hitting the pawn, and it's a lot more psychological pressure now for black. So that was the reason. King h7, queen d1, bishop d7, protecting this pawn, rook to c2, bishop f5, takes, rook to b8, and now slowly and slowly, Caruana is building up pressure. Queen h5, rook to g8, bishop to b2, and here there was a golden opportunity for Caruana to continue the game. It is move 30. Both the players had an extremely long time as there is no increment in the clock. The best move was to give up an exchange sacrifice after rook b2, a3 hitting the rook to b7, and guess what? It's so much complicated. White is, although it looks like white is hitting the pawn on f7, but now comes bishop f2. You can't capture the pawn on f2, f7 because bishop into g3 is coming with a check. You see? So you must remove the rook, and now I'm having d5. You can't capture the pawn. I'm having queen d6. And guess what? I'm hitting the rook, I'm hitting the bishop, I'm threatening knight f3. It's a discovered check with leading to a mate on h2. So I would say till after playing g5, we can evaluate the position that black is better. But definitely it's so much complicated. It's already very hard to find any player who thinks after a3 and after rook b7, every player stops the calculation. They think that it's a triple attack, and even they calculate like bishop into f2, but after seeing rook into a3, they do not see d5. It's such a hard move. The idea is to give up a pawn, play a queen d6, threatening a discover attack. Impossible to find. Very hard to find. That was the reason after bishop into b2, both the players agreed to a draw. Caruana wasn't able to find anything. Very good result for Nepomniachtchi surviving from Caruana's bite. Caruana was on the driver's seat, but he lost control and it's a draw. So now let's move to the final game of the second day. Duda versus Liren. So Duda is playing with the white piece and Liren is playing with the black pieces. So Duda starts out the game with 1 e4. e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we have standard Italian, knight f6, d3. So we are not going to see any tracks for gambits. So where we have this, and we have bishop f2. But I think perhaps Duda was not prepared, and he didn't like this knight g5 idea, and he didn't went for the tracks for gambit. Just joking. We have d3, bishop c5, c3, d6, castle, rook e1, a5, h3. It's all theory. It's a very standard theory. h6, knight to d2, bishop e6, bishop b5, queen b8. A very nice idea of playing queen b8. Idea is to play queen a7, a4, queen a5. And yeah, queen a7 idea is to put pressure on the pawn on f2. Knight f1, queen f7, rook e2, protecting the pawn on f2. We have a4, knight g3, rook queen f5. We have a trade. Bishop d2, bishop b6, queen c2, king h7. I would say nothing happened special in this game. We have c4 hitting the queen, queen h7, bishop c3, knight to g8, rook d1, and playing c5. c5 looks such a bad move. It blocks his own bishop. But just look at the idea of Ding. He thinks that as much as my bishop is bad, your bishop is also bad. I'm going to trade the bishops by playing bishop a5 whenever I want. So nothing problem. Rook f1, we have c6. So perhaps Ding wants to maneuver the bishop perhaps. Knight h2, f6, rook e2, queen d7, bishop d2, g5 by black. Rook b1, knight to e7, b4, opening up the position. Bishop c7, bishop e6, queen e8. Couple of moves were played, nothing special. White tried his best, black also tried his best to open up the position, and it looks like something is happening on the king side. Bishop c8, bishop e3, check, and we have a draw. Nothing special happened in the game, a standard variation, but definitely in the game it was a highly pressured game. But as for our spectators, nothing was special because we like something spicy like attack. We want some sacrifice. So we have the draw against Duda versus Ding on the second round. So these were all the rounds recap of the second day. And sorry for uploading the second round recap after one day, because I was actually playing a chess tournament one day on that day when the tournament was happening. So this was the recap of the second round. If you like this recap, then make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new to my channel, and make sure to cheer for Hikaru Nakamura because he is also one of my favorite player because the style he plays with is very aggressive and very interesting. And yeah, he's having a large popularity on YouTube and Twitch. So definitely it boosts the chess. Yeah, definitely it helps everyone. So I'm going to come up with the round number 3 recap. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess.